call on another longtime colleague of Ted's and Professor Emeritus here at UBC, Peter Harnetty.
Yes, I was a long-time colleague of Ted's. I knew him for almost 50 years. From when he first came to UBC in the summer of 1966 until I last saw him in August of 2012 when he was in the UBC hospital. A very sad occasion for me because he didn't recognize me. It made me think back, to the early times when we did meet. In the summer of 1966. But before then, in 1965, was when I first really heard about him. I'm, for those of you who don't know, in South Asian studies, Indian studies, not in Chinese studies. The then head of the department, Bill Holland, received a letter one day from Ted Pulleyblank inquiring if there was a position available for him in our department at UBC. Well, today, of course, our university stands high in the international ratings that come up from places like the Financial Times in London and from Shanghai, in the top 20s and 30s. But let's be realistic. 50 years ago, it was a different story. The university was just then beginning that big expansion in student numbers and in professorial acquisition that turned it in from a provincial Canadian university into an international one. And it was people like Ted Pulleyblank who helped bring about that transformation. Now, Bill Holland, when he got this letter, hurried to the Dean of Arts and said, "We must get this man. He's one of the world's leading sinologists." And he was able to persuade the dean. Not easy, even now, to get deans to make appointments at the full professor rank. They'd much rather use the money to hire 2 assistant professors who were just beginning. But it happened. It was rather odd that it should happen that way. And I can imagine the consternation in Downing College, Cambridge, when he informed his colleagues that he was coming here. "What, Ted? Going back to the colonies? Are you mad?" Glad he was, perhaps, but their loss was our gain. Now, part of the arrangement, very selfless on the part of Bill Holland, was that once Ted got here, after he'd settled in, he would succeed Holland as the department head. So he came in 1966, spent 2 years as a member of the department, and then in 1968 he succeeded Holland as the head. He made an immediate impact in administration and teaching, and of course he was already established as a scholar. For example, on the administrative side, I can remember his first department meeting that he chaired when he announced that from now on we would keep minutes of our meetings. The department had been administered rather informally, and that was a change for the better. And that there would be committees to share the burden of the headship's work. Well, part of that work in those years was to make new appointments, especially early on in the field of language teaching, which he rightly saw as being the critical thing for the development of Asian studies as an international department. And he made some very good appointments. Jan Walls in Chinese, who turned around the teaching of Chinese. Matsuo Soga in Japanese. And then South Asian languages were introduced. Grushka in Sanskrit, Ken Bryant in Hindi, all of whom laid the foundation for language teaching, which has continued to be the strongest element, I suppose, of the Asian Studies Department. And those appointments in language were reinforced by other appointments in the field of literature and popular religions. For example, Dan Obermeyer, who is here tonight, in Chinese popular religions, Florence Chow in Chinese poetry, Leon Hurwitz on the Japanese side, Turuta in Japanese literature, Ken Takashima, Leon Zolbrod. The department, by the time he laid down the burden in 1975, looked very different from what it was. But not only on that personal level of who he appointed and why, was the development of the enrollments. There were 700 enrollments in 1968. When he stopped being head in 1975, there were 900. That's an increase of 30%. And those figures are important. If you're running to the dean saying, I want this appointment, I want that one, I mean, that's the first book he looks at, is the book of enrollments, that you can justify that way. Not just enrollments, but programs. The PhD program, without which, of course, the department cannot claim really to be a first-rate research department, were launched under his headship. And it's heartening to see that the two first students who enrolled in the Chinese PhD program are here today. You just heard from one of them. And the other is with us too, Jerry Schmidt. Both of those students went on to become distinguished sinologists in their own right. And that too, I think, is a tribute to Ted's work. In those days, as I was just pointing out earlier to the incumbent head, in those days, heads were appointed for life. After 7 years of it, he's had enough of the administrative. It's a very time-consuming task to be a head. In 1975, he decided to step down as head. But of course he stayed on and continued his excellent teaching and outstanding research until the retirement came in 1987. Of course he continued his teaching for the rest of that year. His retirement party was held at my home in the spring of 1988. And I took a lot of pictures. Not all of them had him in it, but I went around photographing people. But I brought them along in case members of his family would like to look at them, copy them if they want. The negatives are there. It was a very happy occasion, and happy because we all knew that he would continue anyway. I mean, on the margins, if you like, not actually in the department of it. And as someone I think you just said, you always saw him at seminars, and not just on China, on Japan and South Asia too. So it was a wonderful career. And as I look back on it and think about it, I see him as being a bright star in the early morning of the Asian Studies Department. And to continue the metaphor, I've turned to the poet, and I think we can truly say of Ted, born of the sun, he traveled a short time towards the sun and left the vivid air signed with his honor.